Hi, this is the Lincoln Journal-Star editorial board endorsement interview with Sean Flowerday, incumbent and candidate for Lancaster County Commission District 1. So Sean, thanks a bunch for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Before you do all the talking, we'll have, well, except for Kent and me asking questions. Kent, who are you and why are you on this Zoom?
Kent Wolgamott. I write about arts and entertainment, but for this purposes, been an editorial board member for over a decade.
All right. So, Sean, you are the current county commissioner in District 1, so you'll have an inside track on this first question. But tell us a little bit about yourself, and then why do you want to keep being a county commissioner, and what experiences and attributes qualify you for that office?
Right. So my background, I kind of come from that place where criminal justice and human service meet. I was a correctional officer, and then I was a caseworker on the maximum security mental health unit for the Department of Corrections at the state. And then from there, I went and joined, I worked as the state administrator for a child welfare service provider here in Nebraska, and that was a statewide operation, and ran from county board for there. Frankly, kind of was sitting around after the 2016 election, knew I wanted to do more. I've always been interested in politics, always been engaged with it, and decided that just the smattering of issues that the county board looked at was really appropriate to sort of my interests and my background. And so I ran, and look at that. The voters thought there was something to it, I guess, because I'm here. So that's why I got started in the first place. That's, kind of a little bit about my background. Why I want to run again, why I want to keep going. There's a lot of work left to do. Our community stands at a pivotal moment on issues of climate resiliency, how we're going to respond to that, infrastructure, county jail overcrowding. All of these things are major concerns, major issues that need to be addressed. And frankly, our work's not done. I came here to, I would say, fight for a fair deal for the people living in the heart of Lancaster County. I think often, because it is a county board, people assume that all of our issues are rural, but the truth is a ton of what we look at is issues and services that affect everybody who lives in Lincoln, in the heart of our community here. And so I often try to be a voice for that. So that's sort of what I think my role is and what I'm doing here.
So in terms of, infrastructure, I mean, city has its issues, county has its own issues. So in terms of repairing and replacing county infrastructure, what are your priorities? What do you think needs to happen, and where does it need to happen?
So first, let's define what we're talking about when we say infrastructure, because I mean, the county has just begun a $10 million rural broadband initiative to build rural broadband infrastructure, to build conduit out into Lancaster County. Based on the current plan, that will result in 50% of all the residents outside of Lincoln being able to access high-speed fiber. And then we have just now applied, or are in the process of applying, for middle mile grants to the federal government that could access, we could end up leveraging enough dollars to get 85% of everybody in the rural areas of Lancaster County hooked up with high-speed fiber. So that's a really, really exciting investment. We've also been able to leverage federal dollars, $2.5 million for a culvert replacement program out in the county, and another $2 million for rural water. To work on both rural quantity and quality issues on that front. When you look at roads and bridges, because that's what I think most people mean when they're talking about infrastructure, following the 2019 floods, we were down to, I think we had 28 or 29 closed bridges following the 2019 floods. We've got that down to single digits now. We really have been making progress on that front. It's been hard. A lot of these are WPA era bridges. This is stuff that was built with federal dollars back, in the Roosevelt, Truman, and Eisenhower administration, and then were resurfaced in the 70s or 80s. And they've just been out there sticking around. And frankly, they're falling apart on our community. We've been able to do a lot with the box culvert replacement projects, being able to replace bridges with a cheaper design structure. ultimately, there's not enough property tax in the world to replace every single bridge in Lancaster County. We could max the levy and still not be able to get it done. And when you look at infrastructure, anytime you're talking about infrastructure, you're balancing that with, you're playing the resource management game against property taxes, because realistically, that's the one funding vehicle Lancaster County has if we're not able to leverage federal dollars. So when we're doing this, we look at farm to market routes, we look at school routes, we obviously look at where the highest level of traffic is, and we try to make our best judgments on what bridges to prioritize, and we work with the engineer's office to get them the funding that they, that we can at least afford to get them at in the priority areas. So it's always a balancing game.
All right, well, I appreciate you expanding. I indeed was guilty of thinking of roads and bridges, but the rest of that stuff is way sexier. So
oh, it's super. That's the fun one. Rural broadband's great. Everyone's excited about that project.
Wind and solar, wind farms, solar farms seem to, they're an important part of power generation in the future, but there seems to be a pretty strong opposition to them. How do you strike how do you strike a balance between the interests of property owners who seem to not want them as neighbors, and the needs that you can see in our society for renewable energy?
So yeah, I mean, let me just start by saying at the beginning of this, climate change is an existential threat to our community. It's an existential threat to every community. It will always be one of my top issues. I expect that to be true all the way through my professional career. And so fundamentally, we are in dire need of new renewable energy, new ways to run our economy, run our cities, run our communities without dirtying our skies or polluting our streams, and without contributing carbon into the atmosphere. I also strongly believe that landowners in general should have the right to develop their land in a way in the way that they want, as long as it doesn't adversely impact the community. You do, of course, have to balance that. I mean, it's very similar, frankly, to the property. I mean, everything's about trying to find that balance, right? You try to balance the need of infrastructure with the need of property taxes. You try to balance the need of energy development with, what I always call quality of life setbacks. I think we've been able to find an okay place for that. I mean, you're never going to make everybody happy on that. For wind turbines, it's 3.5 times the height of the turbine. So a 500-foot turbine will never be closer to the outside wall of a homeowner's dwelling than, what is that, 1,750 feet. I think that's a reasonable setback. I really do. I mean, there's a lot of things within my house that within 1,750 feet of my house that maybe I wouldn't necessarily choose, but we don't always get to pick everything that our neighbors do. And solar is the same way. I think it's 450 feet from a solar panel to the outside exterior wall of a dwelling where somebody lives. We do build these quality of life setbacks in so that people have a barrier, both for their views, for maybe the noise that might be created, and just so that it doesn't impede on their day-to-day life. Fundamentally, I'm going to support anything, or I'm always going to be supportive of rural economic development. I'm also always going to be supportive of anything that protects our clean air and water. And so fundamentally, I think that's kind of where I stand. I'm an unabashed proponent of renewable energy, and we'll always keep trying to take action to combat climate change.
All right. So we've seen, between COVID and politics, we've seen kind of a rift open in our community, and it's not just our community, it's across the country. How do you govern in an age that's so divisive? How do you account for the interests of those that perhaps you disagree with?
Right. I mean, if you want to see, let's start with this question. If you want to see where I think government's still working pretty well today, and where partisanship hasn't actually infected everything, come down to a county board meeting sometime. We don't have that kind of partisanship, and I don't think you would find anybody on the current board who would tell you that there's a nasty partisan divide on our board. We're incredibly civil. We're friends, frankly. Deb Shore, who's a longtime Republican, county commissioner. She's a mentor of mine. She's a friend of mine. Today's her birthday. We were talking about, getting together for a cup of coffee later today after this. So that kind of civility and nonpartisanship that you don't find that in very many places in American politics today. I think you really do find that at the county right now. Certainly there are people who, there's a massive cultural and ideological divide in our country and in our community right now. I mean, look at, Senator Clements brought the bill last year to try to take away local control at the health department, which I obviously don't support. I very much support the local control aspect. And I think having our local health department have that nimbleness and have that ability to respond to the pandemic was vital. I think it's part of why our community has done so well in comparison to other communities of similar size and, frankly, just similar resources. You start by finding common ground. I mean, how to build compromise, there's no secret to it, right? You start by finding the things you agree on. You start by trying to see the other person as a human, at worst, the opposition. You try to never think of them as the enemy. And you move forward. You build on the places you agree, and you try to look past the places you don't. I don't know if there's any secret magic bullet to building bipartisanship on any kind of macro level, but it can still be done in politics today. I would tell you at the city county building, it still is being done.
All right. Kent, this is our first county board person, so you don't know when to jump in, but you can jump in if you want.
Okay. And you know what I'm going to start with, my favorite issue. The city of Lincoln is facing the need to come up with a second water supply and where does the county fit into that? Do you favor some sort of way the county can get involved in that and help bring that impact in part for the future of the county as well?
The county's involved. I'm the representative from Lancaster County on the mayor's task force to create the second water source. I think it's one of our biggest issues right now. I mean, I sort of put it hand in hand up there with climate change on the big things we need to do for this community to move forward from a 50 or 100-year mark. I completely agree with you. It's a massive thing that has to get done. And Lancaster County is a partner already and has been from the beginning. Me personally, my day job, I don't think it's any secret that my day job is I'm legislative staff for Senator Bostar. I worked on the original bill as well. So I've been a proponent of this idea from the beginning. I'm glad we were able to leverage some ARPA money to at least get the design and the engineering figured out. I think this is a fantastic design for our community. And we're already looking at on that second water source task force that's been meeting, and we've got another meeting next week. We're already looking at a regionalized approach, I think. I mean, it's too early to say anyway how it's going to land, but it's not just necessarily a second water source for Lincoln. It could be a second water source. I mean, there's been talk of reaching all the way down to Fairbury. I wouldn't be surprised at all if this was a regional approach to a second water source for this area that connects Waverly, that connects Hickman, that connects smaller communities around Lincoln. Certainly, we need the redundancy and we need the extra water quantity for Lincoln. And I was in the emergency response center when our well fields were threatened back in 2019. Those were scary 3 or 4 days there. And it's ever since then, I mean, that's been one of our top priorities. I think that really kind of woke everybody up to the need for this. So I agree with you entirely. It's a massive need. Lancaster County is already a partner, and I think we're going to continue marching forward on it.
You guys had a very eye-popping budget this year,
Sure.
in part because of all that federal money. Right. I guess this is kind of a two-part question, because the county board has most of its power, so to speak, to affect what goes on in the department comes budgetarily. Yeah. And yet you have the question of how do we do this without massively raising property taxes or something. So right. I guess the two questions would be, what are your priorities that you can affect through the budget for whatever programs, whether it's like additional attorneys for the public defender's office or whatever.
Right.
And how do you see the property tax issue working in the county?
Right. So it is true. Like people see a 12% number, in growth from the county budget, and it is, eye popping is the word the Journal Star has been using. If you take the federal money out, that budget becomes a really pretty tight, pretty normal budget, frankly. We had 5 FTEs, none of them 5 new FTEs, none of them on property taxes. We were able to find different ways to route the money so that none of it, or no new property taxes, I should say. Different contracts were reduced to create the room in the budget for those FTEs. We planned for a 2.5% growth on property taxes, and when we got the 4% valuations back, then we actually reduced the levy a little bit. I mean, it wasn't any kind of enormous, ground swelling event of property tax reduction, but we were actually able to lower the levy a little bit. How you balance those needs is, I mean, I think this year we started with looking at the salaries that really needed to be adjusted, both due to inflation and to changing market pressures. So we looked at nursing staff, nurse staffing. We looked at those salaries. We looked at obviously law enforcement and corrections. We had to make those adjustments. The judges decided to create a hike in what are being paid, probably not inappropriately either, but they decided to create a hike in what attorneys were being paid when they were being handed cases down by judges. And so all of those started out as, I mean, that sort of set the benchmark of where we were going to be heading. The rest of it was then just trying to find places where we could keep the growth to a minimum, without defunding anything, without cutting, slashing departments or damaging our ability to provide services. It's Lancaster County has experienced really pretty amazing growth over the last 10 years. And with growth always comes, usually a growth in services, but our budget has, I would say, our budget increase have been very modest when they have grown. And actually over the last 2 years, we've been able to reduce the property tax levy 2-year running. So I would make a case that Lancaster County is a pretty prudent pretty prudent governor or steward of property tax dollars right now.
Is there anything that you think needs to be increased, that this is the pressing sort of issue that we need to spend some money on?
There's always more need for physical infrastructure, for roads and bridges. That's no surprise, right? It's the deficit there coming off of decades of neglect to the roads and bridge infrastructure is a problem, and that always needs it. I do think we've done a pretty good job of prioritizing the right bridges and the right, the right lanes of traffic through the county at the moment. I would also say, until this budget, I would have told you it was public health nurse staffing, and not just for like pandemic response, but I've been a big proponent of the universal home visiting program and the idea of bringing that back, new services for new parents to make sure that families are getting off on the right track. And then just this year, we were able to get that. And there are a bunch of new nurses coming into the Lincoln and Lancaster County Health Department to begin that program. So I'm really excited about that. So I would say, the two that jump out to me are physical infrastructure needs and increasing access to healthcare are probably the two places that where the focus ought to be over the next year or two. Because we've done law enforcement this year and we've done the attorney fees, and so I think that's probably where the focus will be over the next year. And actually, no, one other one I should talk about. Lancaster County has leveraged $2 million for the creation of a new CPC unit, and then another $6 million for a family resource center that's going to be looking at behavioral health in at-risk youth, basically trying to intervene with the families and with the kids before the law ever gets involved. And so we're partnering with the region on that. And so I would say those are two other places where I think you can expect to see larger expenditures over the next, say, 2 years, and really have opportunities for making a difference in our community that will probably be a place where we're going to move some budgetary power.
And you covered my last question already. I was going to ask about the health department
Sure.
and Clement's bill.
Our health department is, so I'm on the board of health. I've been part of all the meetings on getting the vaccines into town. I've been part of all of those sort of strategic planning decisions that were made for that. Our health department's doing a great job. We have an amazing leader in Director Lopez. We've led the state in vaccines and boosters. We've done a really, really good job. The last thing we need is the state legislature taking local control away from an organization that's doing an awesome job.
All right. With that, Sean, I think we're down to my last question, which is, what didn't we ask you that you wish we had?
So I think the thing that probably people forget about them the most with Lancaster County government is, probably the role that we play economically. I think people think of the county, they think roads and bridges, they think county corrections, they think criminal justice. We've been able to provide some real support to our local airport this year through the minimum revenue guarantees, and also then through the visitors promotion funds. I would tell you, I think Lancaster County is on the verge of embracing the idea of building a convention center here. I know I consider it a top priority economically, and I think the role we play in tourism and the role we play in just the economics of downtown, I think often gets forgotten. So I would just put a plug in for that. Boy, is there anything else that I would miss? Lincoln needs more affordable housing. Probably one of our top needs is we need Lincoln and Lancaster County need more affordable and middle housing, and we need it quickly because we've got the jobs, and what's preventing us from filling all of them right now is the cost of housing. So I would talk about economics and tourism, and then housing.
All right. Well, with that, Sean, I think we are all wrapped up. We certainly appreciate your time today. We wish you the best, and thank you very much for this interview.
Thanks for making the time. Thanks for talking with me, Kent.
All right. We'll see you later.
Thank you.